Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Expo Factor. I'm your host, Leah Lee from Expo Stars, and today we're exploring something that every exhibitor experiences, but very few truly understand: the psychology behind first impressions. When we think about successful trade shows, we often focus on booth design, technology, graphics, or lead capture. But before a visitor speaks to your team, scans a badge, or even picks up a brochure, their brain has already started making decisions about your brand. Joining me today is my good friend Victoria Matey. She's an event psychology advisor, speaker, and co-founder of Matey Events. Victoria has spent years helping organizations understand how behavioral science and psychology can transform the way we design exhibitions, events, and experiences that people genuinely remember. Together, we're going to be exploring what happens in those crucial first few moments on the show floor, why some booths naturally draw people in and while others are overlooked. Understanding human behavior can help exhibitors create stronger engagement, better conversations, and more meaningful results. Victoria, it's fantastic to have you on the Expo Factor. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Great to speak with you again. I think the last time we saw each other was at IMEX quite briefly last year.
Movie was exhibited live in
Or
Tampa.
maybe, yeah, maybe it could have
Yeah,
been. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
could have been.
yeah.
I think, yes,
Mhm.
you ran a session there, didn't you? Yeah,
I
so
did.
I,
Yes, I
I do
did.
remember that
Two
quite
sessions
vividly.
actually. Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing how time flies, right?
I know, right? Yeah, it flies very quick. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's just do a quick introduction to yourself. I know I've said a
Mhm.
few things already about you, but tell us a bit more about how you got into the world of events and what you're passionate about, and yeah, and the kind of things that you've been working on recently.
Yeah. Um, I was an event planner, so I am in event industry since 2004, I think. So around 22 years already. And
Oh wow, okay.
yeah, I mean, time flies.
You've got 4 years on me.
And about 10, 12 years ago, I started my consultancy. I decided to share my experience, to share my expertise that I gained throughout, these years and, working internationally. And because I was always interested in psychology, and I actually, studied psychology as part of my first degree at university as well. mm, I didn't realize at some point that there is such a close connection between events and psychology, because events are all about people, right? We
Yeah.
we work with people, work for people, and there is so many aspects. At the time, I actually didn't realize how many aspects can be looked at through psychological lenses. So now I can tell you that it's basically everything. You name it, and I can name the connection to psychology to down to specific concept that can play a role there, right? So looking at event planning, at booth design, and of experiences and experience design in general through a behavioral psychological lens is what I've been doing, what have been my focus for the past decade.
Right.
And I'm an advanced psychology advisor. We work with teams to help them understand how to solve their challenges, their typical challenges, with psychological solutions.
Right. Okay. Okay. Wonderful. So you've walked obviously many a show floor. Um, let's talk about event psychology. What do we
Mhm.
actually mean by event psychology? You've touched upon a bit there, but why should
Yeah.
exhibitors really care about bringing in an event psychologist or event psychology into their thinking when it comes to designing the customer journey?
Right. I think the simplest way I explain event psychology is that it's about looking at traditional event questions through a behavioral lens. So
Yeah.
instead of just asking, what should our booth look like?
Yeah.
Or what activation should we add? We should ask what actually shapes if somebody notices us, like approaches us, right? Talks to us, remembers us, right? Because all of those decisions happen in people's minds,
Yeah.
right? And for exhibitors, that means moving away from designing purely on gut feeling, right? Or trends or what looks impressive. That's what we see oftentimes, right? And looking at how people actually pay attention, form impressions, respond to a space, how they make decisions.
Yeah.
Because when I look at a booth through that lens, I'm usually looking for the gaps between what the team wants
Yeah.
people to do and what the space design actually signals.
Yeah.
And often that means the changes that you can introduce are not dramatic, they are not expensive, right? They're
Yeah.
small changes in layout, in clarity, in sensory load, interaction, right, with people, with booth staff. But those tiny changes, they can make a real big difference because they address the mechanism behind the
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can you give us some real world examples of what you mean by that? So, for example, it could be how the coffee machine is positioned and where it's positioned on the booth.
Yeah, one of the examples is the entrance point, right? Some of the booths design um, some of the booths are designed in a way that kind of creates a closed sort of entry,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that might affect some people that they might not feel safe enough or
Yeah.
confident enough to enter. And
Yeah.
so, and of course, there are other factors at play at the same time, but and that's why you have to look at the booth design
Yeah.
in a comprehensive way, in a coherent way. So it's not just one factor, and we can talk about it later, but generally, it's just one of the examples of how open versus closed lens we can
Yeah.
put people off or make them feeling welcome or
Yeah.
create an inviting feeling for them.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned before, obviously, it's human beings that we are dealing with during an exhibition. And obviously, we have the show floor, and then people obviously have their home lives as well. Can you describe how different people behave on the show floor compared to real life? Um, I know that from a personal perspective that people's behavior changes when they see freebies and things like this, but what other differences are there from day-to-day life as to people how they're actually thinking and deciding things on the show floor? Is there any difference?
Well, I actually think that there is no difference. Of course, the context matters. Of course, it's yeah. I mean, obviously, we can compare, step by step, and the behavior will differ because the context differs. Facial situation differs from the regular
Yeah,
situation, like if you're in a supermarket.
yeah,
But the beauty of this approach, the event psychology approach, is that you have to know to understand the basic
yeah,
concepts of the behavior, how the human mind works. And if you understand that, then you can apply it to different contexts. And the
yeah,
concepts underlying behavior, they are universal, basically, right?
yeah,
So whether it's about grocery shopping or, walking around the trade show floor, the concepts will be the same.
yeah.
And yeah, from that perspective, there is no difference, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to exhibitors starting that journey of deciding to exhibit and then starting planning the space and the experience, where should they be thinking about event psychology in that stage? Is it before the booth design, during the booth design, or is it an afterthought?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should start before. the trade show, and um, I think we often kind of assume that um, people arrive to the trade show, to the conference, right, with
Yeah,
unlimited attention, unlimited energy,
yeah,
completely empty brain, completely undistracted, ready to absorb. Um, and if you think about a real trade show floor, there are hundreds of like messages, colors,
yeah,
lights, people's faces, screens, and they have to make hundreds of decisions within that period of time, which is quite limited, right? So it's quite compressed. And all these things, they compete for attention.
yeah,
And I think when you are considering your ratio for strategies and booth design strategies, you have to understand that people come to an event um, with certain limitations, right? And
yeah,
you have to take that into account when you create your booth, when you create your plan for the trade show. And just as an example, when you add another giant screen or another, message because you want to stand out, right? You're
yeah,
basically adding to the law that I just described. And the question should not be how do we attract people? It should be how do we make it easier for the brain to understand us? How do we
yeah.
make them feel comfortable with us? And how do we nudge those decisions to engage?
Yeah, yeah. As I always say, I think one of the key decisions an exhibitor can ever make is to really understand how can they snap people out of their zombiness, if you like, because everybody that goes into an exhibition floor, they are like zombies, right? Because they are overwhelmed with information and they're actually in a
Yeah.
trance, yeah. And you have to basically snap them out of it so that you
Hmm.
can actually get the attention for your booth, okay? And it's how do you do
Absolutely.
that? How do you
Yeah,
do that?
absolutely.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
a lot of our decisions are made on autopilot,
yeah,
and understanding that is critical because that's how you can um, decide on strategies that can pull them out of that state, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but again, it should be a system. It
yeah,
should. I always say that it's not enough to apply just one specific strategy, even if it's a powered strategy call today. Because if you do that, it just like a patchwork, right? You just apply this to close the gap. But if you don't apply systematically,
yeah.
then you won't receive the consistent results.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, the consistent results are through consistent behavior, right? Consistent behavior change.
Yeah.
So you have to apply it before the event, during the event, and after the event as well, in terms of the follow up as well, right? Let's start with that journey then. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of an attendee, okay? What is going on in our mind for the first a few seconds when we walk into the hall from a psychological point of view. So I mean, take it out, give it out to the listeners and viewers out there. Okay. So, what is going on through our mind when we have checked in, we've got our badge, and we enter through those doors? What's going through our brains?
Yeah. I think the key thing to remember is that a lot happens in people's minds before they
Yeah.
consciously think, I like that booth,
Yeah.
right? So I often say or describe a space as an invisible influencer because we are usually not aware of what exactly shaped our reaction, right? And people are not working around thinking, I entered that booth because the layout was coherent
Yeah.
or, the lighting lowered my psychological resistance. It's not. They
Yeah.
just think this looks good, or not for me, or they even not might not think about it at all, right? So they just do it without consciously realizing what prompted them to do it, right? And there are various factors like layout, entry point that I already mentioned, noise, temperature, colors, right? Social factors, who is already inside, what the staff are doing. Um, so all of that gets processed and shapes the emotional and cognitive response before you see the final behavior, the walk-in or walk-out, right? Um, and I'm actually going to share a chart so that will describe the various categories, various factors, and the entire process, how it comes down to psychological response and to the actual behavior. I'll publish it on my website and LinkedIn. So yeah, I mean, a lot goes into what we see only the surface. We see only the final behavior, but there is a lot going on underneath.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot going on. Okay, so we have some. Maybe we'll have positive energy. Maybe we'll absolutely tired out from the jet lag and so on. So
Yeah.
all that is going on in our head. So what is going to make me think uh, uh, that booth over there is the first one that I'm going to visit? What psychologically, I mean, is it going to be the colors? Is it going to be the
Mhm.
mood I'm in? Is it so? What kind of things should an exhibitor be looking out for when they're doing the design to actually attract uh, the visitors when they're walking past or when their booth is in the eye gaze of the attendee?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think the proper question, the correct question would be not how do we attract it and what kind of element might uh, push them, right? Or
Yeah,
be that influential or
yeah,
impactful element. But how do we want people to feel?
yeah,
What kind of emotions are they experiencing, or what kind of emotions we want them to experience
yeah,
within our space, right? And so once you
yeah,
look at the psychological states
yeah,
that are playing out underneath, then it will be easier to come up with several elements that might nudge people to make this decision in your favor. And when I say several elements, that's exactly the point. There is no one magic element,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
A
yeah,
bright color might get attention, but attention doesn't automatically mean that I will walk in, right?
yeah, yeah,
A huge boost might look impressive, but I also assume that is going to be sort of difficult to navigate, or I
yeah,
might feel like intimidated or shy or rushed, like kind of um I might feel uneasy about it, right?
yeah,
So there were Gordon mentioned that there is a framework developed by researchers from neuroarchitecture and neuroaesthetics fields and similar fields. They identified three dimensions that kind of shape how we experience the space, right? And so those dimensions are coherence, fascination, and wholeness. Coherence means, can I understand the space easily? Where do I go? What is happening there, right?
yeah,
Fascination means that whether or not it sparks curiosity, do I want to explore it, right?
yeah,
And hominess means basically, does it make me feel safe? Does it make me feel like home? Does it make me feel like I belong, right?
yeah, yeah,
And of course, context matters a lot here.
yeah.
What works for one audience and one sector might not be ideal for a
Of
different
course, yeah,
audience or a different industry, right? So, but those three dimensions are very helpful when you, again, kind of put together different strategies and different elements in your booth design. It's very handy to keep them in mind that that space should score high on hominess, fascination, and coherence.
yeah. Fantastic. Okay, that's a great piece of advice because um, I've seen a lot of booths where they try to do too much, okay,
Hmm.
and that
Yeah.
loses the attendee, right? Because there's too much things going on, okay,
Yes.
and the messaging doesn't get through. Can you give me any examples where, in those three areas that you just mentioned, where where exhibitors can actually get it completely wrong?
Mm. Mm, A lot of exhibitors uh, prefer to add things rather than subtract. And again,
Yeah,
it's um, it's not their fault. In a way, that's how the human brain is wired, right? So
yeah,
we naturally tend to add than subtract.
yeah,
So it's kind of
yeah,
easier for the brain. And so, let's say, like we have um, colors, right? It can create a certain feeling. It can attract
yeah,
attention, but more colors isn't automatically better, right?
yeah,
If you've got bright walls, bright floor, multiple screens,
yeah,
on top of, like a lot of messages and products everywhere, which is
yeah,
a typical scenario, right? So every one of those elements is asking the brain to process. So it increases cognitive load and it takes away from um, the feeling of like ease and comfort, which goes under coherence and openness, right?
yeah,
So that's one example. And I would say, I talk a lot about cognitive load. I do believe that this is one of the probably one of the easiest, one of the most critical things at the same time to remember, and one of the easiest to fix, right? Because instead of adding things, even though it's more difficult, but please think about what you can remove from your space, what
yes,
you don't need. Then once you fix that, once you um, consider cognitive load throughout your boost design and your trade show strategy, then a lot of other things will fall into place. A lot of other um, elements um, will be experienced in a different way, in a completely different way.
yeah,
And again, those scores on coherence, on fascination, on performance will be high for you.
yeah, absolutely. So, what kind of things? I mean, let's play, matchmaking. I mean, I'm an attendee. Okay, you've mentioned obviously I want to be coherent and I want to be fascinated. I want to be curious. But what is going to drive me? Okay, to say hello to the booth staff. Okay, and what is going to drive me to take the next step in terms of uh, the follow-up process? What kind of things should an exhibitor be looking to tick, okay, in terms of whether it's peace of mind, okay, or whether it's curiosity, or whether it's fascination, or whatever. What are my top three as an attendee or as a visitor things that I need to tick to say yes, this exhibitor I really want to invest my time in and learn more about this. So, as an exhibitor, what should I be doing?
Mm. I think understanding the goals
Yeah,
of your attendees and emotions that might influence their decisions and their next steps are absolutely important. And that's why, I think the strategy should not be focused on the actual event day
yeah,
or, booth exactly, right? Booth design only. That strategy should start with pre-event, pre-trade show, and with post-show strategies. And let's edit this out as well. So that strategy should start with what you do before the event and after the event, right?
yeah,
And how you communicate with your attendees. How much do you know about them, about your
yeah,
participants, right? About your visitors, and what are you going um, to talk about with them? What you're going to communicate after the show as well. I think
yeah,
those are critical stages where a lot of communication and connection with your audience happens. And they are always, or in many cases, left to chances. So I think focusing on pre and post trade show is absolutely important.
yeah. That's a nice little segue into what I want to talk about next, and that is, should exhibitors be designing for attention or should they be designing for memory? Because we talk about,
Um,
yeah, so this is because everybody that I see on the show floor, most exhibitors try to focus on grabbing your attention, okay?
mhm.
But nobody, well, seldom have I seen an exhibitor really focus on creating really good memories so that when they actually follow up, the visitors actually remember them and say, yeah, that was a great experience. Yeah, thank you for calling me and let's take the conversation forward. So um, I think that's where a lot of business potential is lost. And yeah, let's talk about a bit more about that. Why do you
Yeah.
think exhibitors focus more on creating attention than creating memories?
I think naturally that this is one of my favorite topics, from our website. Um, I think people confuse attention sort of what means attracting attention and being remembered means, and they confuse
Yeah,
those two things all the time.
yeah,
Because you can attract somebody's eyes without influencing their decision, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, they they can look at your face or they can talk to you because they found your space
yeah,
impressive. It still doesn't mean that they will remember you. They
yeah,
may remember you for all the wrong reasons as well. That's a separate conversation,
yeah,
right? Um, so you basically can attract attention without creating a memory, and that happens. The confusion happens because again, people don't really understand how memory and how attention works at a brain level, and
yeah,
so attention is basically the gatekeeper, the first door, um, and memory is what remains after the experience, right?
yeah,
Ultimately, what becomes available when that person later needs to make a decision.
yeah,
So, memory consists, so to speak, right? Consists of several things, and attention is one of those things.
yeah,
But it's just the first step, right?
yeah,
And so that's why visibility alone is not enough. And I
yeah,
always, make this argument about sponsorship, right? Like putting a logo somewhere that
yeah,
maybe people technically saw it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But if it leaves no imprint in their minds,
yeah,
what value did that visibility actually create,
yeah,
right? And for both, the same applies.
yeah,
The goal shouldn't be how do we become impossible to miss.
yeah,
It should be what will stay in someone's mind after they walked away.
yeah, absolutely. And it's mapping those touch points with the people's emotions, right? That is going to create the memories.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Memory is closely linked with emotions and with attention. And
yeah,
if we understand how all those elements work and what kind of factors impact memory as well, we can design the better solutions. We can make sure that our space sends specific signals that create this memorability that add um, to how add to that imprint in people's minds, right?
yeah,
Because people usually don't really make decisions on the spot,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But they make decisions much later about your products or your brand, right? And so if they don't remember you,
yeah,
so how can they make a decision in your favor, right? They cannot,
absolutely, yeah,
right? And so
yeah,
memorability and working with to create that imprint in their minds should be your key goal, not grabbing attention,
yeah,
right? Not
absolutely,
catching their attention. And yeah, so this is the I think it becomes obvious once you understand how it works at a people.
yeah, that's great. And I think I've been talking on a previous podcast about senses, the use of senses, and the more senses you actually use within that experience, the more memorability you're going to have as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. Senses are again another factor that come into creating memorable experiences because we experience the world around us through senses, and when we engage more senses, that
Mhm.
registers that kind of sense of reach of signals to the brain, and so it gets encoded in a stronger way and in a better way. So basically, um, when you engage as many senses as possible, you make sure that it becomes memorable for people's minds. And I think alignment is very important point here that a lot of exhibitors miss. Um, and by that I mean engaging as many senses as possible, but in a coherent way. So
Yeah,
multisensory doesn't mean activate as many senses
yeah,
as possible, every sense as intensely as possible, right? It means
yeah,
thinking how the sensory elements work together,
yeah,
right? If the visuals say calm and dreamy, but the music is blasting, that
yeah,
the brain has to resolve this mismatch, and that creates effort. Comes back to the cognitive load, right? Um, One of my favorite examples was the Montreal activation of community leaders.
okay,
Um, so they basically use the venue's bathroom as part of their activation, right?
yeah,
And
I
so what they
remember,
did
yeah,
inside, you remember
yeah,
that, right? So
yeah,
what they did inside, they actually focused on multiple senses, but it was very coherent, right? So they engaged, multiple senses through colors, brand colors, right? And gentle music, scent, flowers,
yeah,
lotions, and soaps. It was all heading to the same unified message. And that's why it didn't feel overwhelming because
mm,
everything supported one coherent
yeah,
experience.
yeah, that's
And
a
I
great
think
example.
that's what sensory design should do. Reinforce the same story, the same message through different channels rather than having every channel shouting from touch.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Let's move on the human to human psychology then.
Mm,
Obviously, exhibitions have been around a long time and they exist obviously to bring humans together. But still, to this day, I see on exhibition floors a lot of people still feeling uncomfortable talking to strangers. Why do you think that
mhm.
is?
Yeah, I call this the social coin, So on one side, every human craves connection. That's our nature, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
we want to be with others.
yeah,
We know that kind of at a subconscious level, we know that it brings us comfort. We feel if we belong, it brings us joy, and there are a lot like multiple benefits in every sense when it comes to connecting with others and
yeah,
when it comes to social bonds, right? But the
yeah,
other side of the coin is that the very same connection or interaction carries social risk,
yeah,
And again, subconsciously, at the same time, we kind of think, what if they reject me, right? What
yeah,
if I interrupt them? What if, no one notices me, right? Or what if I have nothing interesting to say, right?
yeah,
All those
yeah,
questions run through the mind, in the back of the mind, right? For basically virtually everyone.
yeah,
And we also systemically underestimate how interested other people are in talking to us.
yeah,
We think that starting a conversation with a stranger will be more awkward
yeah.
than it usually turns out to be. And
Yes.
that was
Yeah,
confirmed in multiple studies. That's just fascinating, um, piece of research for me, because it really shows how irrational we can be when it comes to um, our social interactions. And
yeah,
then if you add social fatigue, right? That kind of we emotionally can uh, kind of our emotional energy can be very low by the end of um,
by the end of
the
the day,
day
yeah,
of
yeah,
interacting with many people at
yeah,
the same
yeah,
time. If you
yeah,
add sensory load, overload, we just
yeah,
talked about, right? Um, Suddenly, that just go network advice isn't particularly useful advice,
yeah,
right? So people want to connect, but wanting to connect and finding it psychologically easy to make the first move are two very different things. So
absolutely, yeah,
basically, we have to remember, we have to keep this in mind all the time, that there are two competing forces
yeah,
that um, define people's social behavior.
yeah, yeah. So, what can exhibitors do then to encourage attendees to come and talk to their people? I know I talk a lot about booth etiquette and obviously
Mhm.
open body language and smiling and things like that. But psychologically, is there anything that exhibitors can do to educate their booth staffing teams in terms of psychological behavior to make those conversations much easier to have with attendees?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think first you have to reduce the social risk.
Yeah,
So, spatially, space-wise, that could mean creating places where people can pause without feeling trapped. It's
yeah,
without feeling obliged to communicate,
yeah,
right? And I would avoid layouts where crossing the booth boundary feels like making a huge commitment, because
yeah,
that usually what puts people off. Um, and I went to the local farmers market the other day,
yeah,
and I saw that there were like different booths, obviously a lot of people, and something very smart captured my attention, because one of the booths, they had a sign that read something like, "Come inside, it's okay to browse and just chat."
yeah,
And I found this a very smart strategy, um, because consciously or subconsciously, a lot of people feel shy or intimidated, or kind of even intimidated to enter that booth, not buying anything, just browsing, right? Because it's a local farmers market, right? And just walk away. And to avoid that feeling, they would rather not enter at all.
yeah,
So to counteract that, what the exhibitors did, they put that little sign, and that little sign did a lot of work for them,
yeah,
because they kind of show that they understand what people may feel even subconsciously, right?
yeah,
And they invited them inside, saying, "It's okay if you don't buy anything and you just
yeah,
browse. It's okay, just come in and chat." And with that small strategy, they did a lot of work, like I said, right? So eventually people will feel better about coming in, right? Walking into that booth,
yeah,
and I'm sure that some of those people will buy something, some of those will come back next time. So, um, again, that little sign was a piece of smart strategy, I would say, for them.
Yeah,
So that's just an example, right? But reducing the social risk, understanding what kind of feelings and emotions run through people's minds at that point is important to
yeah,
think through and to um, counteract, right?
yeah,
If you need to. And then,
yeah,
of course, like you said, looking at staff behavior is important.
yeah,
Um, if I don't know, three people are standing at the edge of the booth waiting to pounce the second I make eye contact, right?
yeah.
That completely changes the psychological meaning of the space.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, I've seen plenty of booths where they've had wall to wall people, sales people lined up waiting to talk to people or waiting to pounce on people.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen people outside of bathrooms, pouncing on people as well. So,
Right.
we don't make it easy for ourselves as exhibitors to um, make people feel at ease.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's again in terms of response, you understand how it feels, right?
Yeah,
How psychologically harmful it can be.
yeah,
Um and yeah, I mean and you can also make the first move easier with conversation prompts,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Shared activities, something that
yeah,
um is genuinely interesting to talk about.
yeah,
The goal should not be to force connection, right? Because
yeah,
when you jump at people, right, this is like forcing connection. You cannot really design connection yourself,
yeah, yeah,
but you can create the conditions
yeah.
uh, where it becomes a much more natural thing.
Yeah, absolutely. May I always say, I mean, one of the first things that you should be doing is finding some common ground with the attendee so that they feel comfortable, that they feel a bond, and that obviously helps the conversation to move along because obviously people like doing business with people that they like. Okay, so it's definitely reducing that conversation friction should always be at the beginning. How do you actually feel? I've seen some strategies where some exhibitors have actually raised the platform, so people actually have to step onto the booth into their space.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
what role psychologically does that play? Do you think does it help people? When they have to take an action to come into that space, or
mhm,
does it not really make a difference at all?
mm. Well, it's always hard to comment on specific strategies because again, you have to look at it in a coherent, systematic way. What
Yeah,
else was done
yeah,
there? Why
yeah,
did they do it specifically that way, right? And
yeah,
so, I mean, in some cases, it might work well for as a space strategy, but in some others, it might actually prevent people from. It kind of creates that friction, right? So,
yeah,
and again, there might be, in most cases, friction is a bad thing and you have to remove it. But in some very specific cases, adding friction,
yeah,
um, like for example, one of the examples that come to mind is that um, when some of the events have the implication when you have to
yeah,
apply to a title. That's a
yeah,
function, right, basically. But for some cases, for some events, that's a useful strategy to have.
yeah,
And so, again, looking at every strategy in a coherent, systematic way, understanding how it plays at the brain level, not as one of solution, but as part of the psychological strategy is what I advocate for, what I call for. And when I work with my clients, I always kind of hesitant. I'm always hesitant to just provide them with a list of solutions, a list of advices to do to think about. Right? It doesn't work that way. You have to work with a number of things underlying behavior at the same time.
Great. So let's finish off the conversation with, I've got a couple of questions for you, which
Okay.
are like practical takeaways for exhibitors listening to us. So if I'm an exhibitor and I have a show next month, if there's one thing I could do, and I don't have another penny to spend on my booth, if there's one thing I can do psychologically to change my results, what would you recommend?
One thing. Uh, well, let's go with this one. I would remove everything that exists because that's what both naturally do.
Right. Okay.
Too many messages, so many products on display,
Yeah.
screens running content nobody's actually watching,
Yeah.
roommates with no relevance,
Yeah.
stuff lined up like their security cameras.
Okay. Yeah.
Activities added because somebody found a list of, I don't know, 10 cool booth activation ideas. Um, and to be clear, I'm not against creative ideas,
Yeah.
but when ideas replace strategy, they are basically just junk food.
Yeah.
They are satisfying in the moment, but they don't solve the underlying problem.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for every element, I would ask, what behavior is this supposed to support?
Yeah.
If there is no good answer, reconsider it.
Okay. That's a great piece of advice. And what one common thing that you see on the show floor would you get rid of? If you were the event director and you're working with the exhibitors, what would you say does not belong on the show floor?
Um, well, I would say I would probably, advise them or try to um, combat that obsession with grabbing attention.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think so much of trade show design still seems
Yeah.
to start with how do we become bigger,
Yeah.
brighter, more impossible to ignore. And like I said, grabbing attention is not the same as winning a decision. So
Yeah.
I would rather start exhibitors with what do we want people to feel, understand, do,
Yeah.
and what needs to happen psychologically for them to get there, right?
Yeah.
And that's the questions that I keep bringing teams back to when we work through exhibitor decisions. Because once you start there, you stop looking at the booth as a collection of features, right? You
Yeah.
you start
Yeah.
looking at it as a space that influences behavior. And if you design for the mind first,
Yeah.
the booth can start doing a lot of work for you.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I think you've probably answered this question already with this previous answer. But my final question to you, Victoria, was going to be from a human psychology perspective, what is the difference that makes the difference between a good exhibition and having an amazing exhibition?
Um, a good exhibition and an amazing exhibition. I think an amazing exhibition is vibrant, emotionally resonant, and it sparks behavior change. Those three
Brilliant. Great
things.
answer. That's a great answer. Victoria, as you know, we could actually talk all day about event psychology, but we only have limited amount of time. So thank you again for your time and your brilliant pieces of advice. Where can our viewers and listeners find you?
Yes, two places. It's my website, eventpsychology.pro,
Yeah,
and my LinkedIn, which is Victoria Matey.
fantastic. Victoria, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the show floor no doubt maybe at Exhibitor Live or somewhere else very soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And there you have it. That was Victoria Matey with some brilliant advice on event psychology. So, key things I took away were that event psychology plays a part in everything on the show floor, from decision making, from the color design, your people, how people make decisions. It's all about event psychology. So, next time you are planning for your show, make sure that you plan in and work with event psychology to make sure that the attendees not only have your attention, but remember your booth, uh, uh, when you actually follow up. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Expo.